Hey, good morning. I'm Diana Opong in for Patricia Murphy. It's Tuesday. This is Seattle Now. The war in Ukraine has illuminated the complicated and contested relationship it has with Russia. University of Puget Sound history professor Ben Tromly will shed some light on this relationship and the long history both countries share. That's in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. Governor Inslee wants the state to break off any business ties with Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. Inslee announced yesterday that he's asked state agencies for an inventory of contracts with Russia so they can be canceled. Inslee also urged Washington-based companies to follow suit. The governor also moved up the expiration date of his indoor mask mandate yesterday. Now that will happen starting March 12th instead of later this month. King County says the same goes for its local mask order. The change was made after federal officials loosened public health guidelines on face coverings last week. And talk about a super soaker. The National Weather Service says Seattle saw more than 2 inches of rain yesterday, easily making it the wettest February 28th on record. We got more rain in 48 hours than we usually get all month. That's going to mean flooding in local rivers, though the forecast says the rain should gradually taper off this morning. Just showers in the forecast. We've all been stunned by the images and details of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and many of us may still be really unsure why this is even happening. Demonstrations around the world have rallied to the side of Ukrainians, including here in Seattle. The invasion feels sudden, but the tension between Russia and Ukraine has a long history. Ben Tromly is a history professor at the University of Puget Sound, where he studies Russian and Eastern European history. He's here to help us get a better understanding of the context behind Russia and Ukraine's unique relationship. Hi, Ben. Thanks for making the time to talk today.
Yes, thanks so much.
So, when you heard about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, what was your first reaction?
My first reaction was shock and disgust. I had foreseen that this was possible. Specialists had been commenting, of course, for weeks on the buildup of Russian forces, but I had hoped that war could somehow be avoided. And this was, of course, a very personal topic for me. I've lived and done research in both Russia and Ukraine. I have family in Russia. My family here in Seattle is English and Russian speaking. And it's very disturbing scenes, kind of reminiscent of the horrible past that I study as a historian.
Is there anything, Ben, that has surprised you most so far in how this has all unfolded?
I'm certainly surprised, along with many others, that the Russian offensive has bogged down to the extent that it has, although I'm not at all surprised that Ukrainians are fighting very actively for their homeland. The other point that I think is very surprising is that the way that Europe has reacted to this conflict in Ukraine. Europe has enjoyed a long period of stability and prosperity after World War II. And this was a rude awakening, essentially. And also it's a reminder to Europeans that borders can be changed, that even the existence of countries are fragile.
Can you help me and others understand why Ukraine is so significant to Putin? I mean, this is coming at a heavy cost. So why would he do this?
President Putin remains tied to a vision of Russia as an imperial power. And we have to remember that he was a Soviet spy in the 1970s. He grew up during the peak of Soviet world power and has felt the empire, the collapse of the Soviet empire, as kind of a personal tragedy. And this is not just a story of Putin. Some, not all Russians, 30 years later, still find it hard to accept that Ukraine is a fully independent and self-sufficient nation the way that Russia is. So I think it's a story of the ongoing connection of some Russians to the imperial past and the failure to create some sort of a new identity that would allow Russia to live side by side with Ukraine and deal with Ukrainian autonomy in a peaceful way.
So Ben, can you tell me more about that unique relationship between Ukraine and Russia?
It's certainly two countries with very entangled pasts that are very close. Ukrainians have played a role in building the Soviet Union. They were a core part of that relationship. But since 1991, Ukraine has increasingly kind of shifted in its political relationships. Ukraine has had democratic transitions where leaders are voted out of power. And of course, we know that President Putin has been in power for 22 years now. So there's been a shift in culture. More Ukrainians have started to speak Ukrainian. Under independence, Ukraine has sought to promote their own culture, create their own national identity. And that's been something that clearly Putin and the Russian elite, or major parts of the Russian elite, don't accept as valid. They think that Russia is the proper successor of the Soviet Union. They're the sovereign country, and the other republics of the former Soviet Union aren't really sovereign countries. And I also want to stress that while Putin is working from a particular view of Russian history and memory, he doesn't have a monopoly on these things. As you know, there have been thousands of Russians who have protested in the streets, risking massive jail sentences to protest this war. Many Russians, including many people I've spoken to, feel shame for this war and understand that this war will have drastic consequences for the future of the country. And especially younger people who didn't grow up in the Soviet times and aren't connected to this idea of a kind of Russian empire in the way that Putin is. And then I can even imagine there's been some reports that even carrying out this war is hard because Russian soldiers are having to fire at people who either could be their relatives or maybe are their relatives. I think this is a very hard thing for Russians to mobilize around a war against a people they have so many close connections to.
Putin has made a lot of enemies, and there are a lot of Russians who are against this. What is, as far as you understand, the underlying goal in invading Ukraine?
I think the underlying goal is to control Ukraine, to have it folded back into the Russian sphere of influence. A big part of this discussion is the expansion of NATO, Western influence in Ukraine. And I think these things are important. But my sense is that even if Ukraine had declared neutrality, Putin certainly wants Ukraine firmly within a kind of reconstituted sphere of influence in Eastern Europe.
So given what you've explained so far, Ben, how does this invasion change the story between these two countries? What are you seeing as far as the history that's being written right now?
Yes, I think a lot of different things. It already from 2014, when Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula and started a conflict in the Donbass region, or at least supported a separatist conflict there, already Ukraine had been moving away from Russian influence. And, you know, the percentage of people who wanted to move closer to the EU, to NATO, has been rising. And I think this is really a moment of divorce between these two peoples in some way. It's hard to imagine Russia having any influence on Ukraine in the future, even if it manages to impose some sort of an occupation on parts of the country. And then, as I mentioned, the implications of this for Europe, for NATO, for the European Union are huge and are causing a renewed interest in these institutions. The European Union, for instance, is we're constantly pointing out its flaws, all the things it does wrong. But today it seems to have a sense of purpose from this specter of a brutal war in Europe.
Ben Tromly is a history professor at the University of Puget Sound, where he studies Russian and Eastern European history. Really appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Caroline Chamberlain Gomez produced today's show. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Diana Opong. Trish is back tomorrow.